When I was a little kid, the two things I loved the most in life were Godzilla and NES games. So naturally, when Godzilla Monster Monsters came out, it was like a dream come true. Well, almost. To sum it up, most of the game revolved around getting into very repetitive outer space levels while smashing tanks and jets, and then fighting against Godzilla's monster enemies. Overall, it was pretty mediocre, but back then, I didn't care. When I got the game as a present for my 10th birthday, I played it night and day, as much as I could. Unfortunately, I traded the game in for Amagon a year later, pretty much to my regret when I found out how that game was like. Recently, I bought an NES system, and through a lot of hunting and asking around, my friend Billy managed to find a copy of Godzilla Monsters. I was pumped to play my favorite childhood game. It never occurred to me to ask Billy where he found it. He also gave me some other games like Legend of Zelda, Bomberman, and some stupid thing called Action 52. But Godzilla had to come first. So I started the game, and nostalgia came flooding back like a tidal wave. Godzilla's 8-bit theme flooded proudly through the speakers, and I was soon grinning like an idiot. Some people laugh at me for playing such outdated games, but I never got much enjoyment for playing any games other than those on the NES. Those 8-bit games take me back to when things were a lot more simpler, more safe. But after what happened with the game, I've forgotten how quick the fun of smashing things as Godzilla wore off in the scrolling levels. The game bombards you with bullets and things crashing into you from every direction, and you're too big to avoid most of them. Although my excitement had worn down some, it wasn't long at all before I got to my first boss battle. My first opponent was Godzilla, an obscure squid kaiju who had never been in a Godzilla movie. The most annoying thing about fighting Godzilla is that he always backs you into a corner and starts smacking you with his tentacles, and you're unable to move until he gets off. This move doesn't do any damage, but it can stall you until the timer runs out and you have to start the fight over again, and then you regain some health afterwards. It's as annoying as it sounds, and of course, he did it as soon as I fought him. Only for some reason this time, the game decided to glitch up, because once he started smacking me, he never stopped. The timer's supposed to end the fight in 40 seconds, but this lasted nearly 4 minutes. After a while, the graphics started to mess up too, with these little red blocks everywhere. Which was weird, but I just took the game out and blew on it and started it back up again. I wasn't about to let a little glitch stand in my way. So I started again, and this time defeated Godzilla and this level's other boss monster, Mogira, without any problems. So then it was on to the next planet, Mars. I browsed around the board and found something unexpected. Where Varen's piece should have been, there was instead a piece representing Titanosaurus. Now, there were only 10 kaiju in the game, and Titanosaurus wasn't one of them. Or so I thought. Maybe Titanosaurus was originally put into the game but was fucked out for Varen some time later? So, I began to feel excited. Not only was I playing my favorite game, but I must have been playing some sort of prototype. Needless to say, I ran through the levels as fast as I can to see Titanosaurus in action. Fought Godzilla again and beat him before he could do his tentacle smack, but this time the glitch started happening when he died. Godzilla's sprite didn't sink to the bottom of the screen, but instead it was devoured by the glitch. His eyes started spawning randomly all over the screen. I know now these glitches with Godzilla were my first warning signs that something was very wrong with this game. But foolishly I ignored it and proceeded to fight Mogira, who this time had a glitch of his own. Mogira was twice the size he should have been, which startled me at first. He was also considerably harder to beat, which is to say, not at all. But I defeated him soon also, and when he died, another glitch happened. This happened so extremely fast I was lucky to get a screen cap of it, but what happened was the giant Mogira sprite had shattered and melted. Also, if you look at the garbled text at the top right corner, you can notice what appears to be a bird in a cage. I still have no idea what that meant. At this point, I was about to fight Titanosaurus, and I was worried as to what kind of glitches would happen this time. But to my surprise, Titanosaurus looked just fine. Although all the game's bipedal monsters were the same height, Titanosaurus was a bit taller. But since Titanosaurus was actually taller than Godzilla in his debut film, I thought it was kinda cool. After a very fun fight with a monster that wasn't supposed to be in the game, I took over the enemy base and proceeded not to Jupiter like normal, but instead to Pathos. Pathos was the same as Jupiter in layout, except the board was a dark blue rather than green. The only thing I noticed was the usual level icons had been replaced with a blue rock and some kind of orange honeycomb shape. There was one icon that had been part of the jungle icon shape, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I checked the other side of the board to see if there was a new monster. Instead of Hedorah, it was Biollante, but that couldn't have been right. Godzilla vs. Biollante didn't come out until 1989, and this game was made in 1988. Maybe Toho put Biollante in the game to build excitement for the movie next year? I tried to rationalize the game's abnormalities any way I could, but that would prove to be futile. Pathos' map song was the first new song I heard in the game. Like most of the new songs, it was very hard to describe, but I'll try. It started out slow and suspenseful, much slower than any other song in the game. But every 12 seconds there would be a loud clashing sound and tempo changed. It's like the composer started randomly playing parts of 5 different songs with the same instrument. I moved Godzilla over to one of the blue rock icons that had replaced the jungle icon and started the level. The level resembled a blue mountain range with a blood-red planet in the sky. But there was something odd about the mountains. They had a shredded paper look to them. I thought at first maybe the glitch was affecting it, but it looked far too intentional. I quickly noticed something else about this new level. There were no enemies, no obstacles. I should also mention that this is where the point meter started becoming glitched beyond comprehension. But it didn't really bother me, I never kept up with the game points anyway. So without any focus, I listened to the music while walking through this level unopposed. The music had a sorrowful feel to it. It honestly would have been rather pleasant if I heard it in a normal game. This level went on for 3 screens, but with no obstacles and no enemies, I finished it rather quickly. I tried other levels of the same type to see if there would enemies appear, but there were none. There was little else to do in the Blue Mountain level, so I tried a different type of level. I tried one of the honeycomb levels, and my eyes were assaulted with a grotesque background with tumorous orange eyes. The sky was the same as the ground, so I assumed the game was indicating that we were in some kind of cave. The only enemies were Matango spawn, but as you can see, the little bastards were everywhere. The music certainly didn't help, with a mixture of screeching sounds and a loud drum beats that sound like a monstrous theme in a horror movie. After completing it, I tried to avoid playing through any more of those levels whenever I could. The map was short, so it only took me a few minutes before I started heading towards Gazora and Mogira for a rematch. But this time their sprites and attack patterns were vastly different. I fought Mogira first. Mogira's replacement was a flying machine with a slight resemblance to a Pescolo alien. It was a bit like fighting Mothra, only it moved with a lot more grace. It attacked by spinning its front tendril like a corkscrew, and it still had an I-beam, but now it fired from the drill. This lanky aberration has replaced Gazora, and the new beast was more of a challenge. It would run and jump at a fast pace, constantly swinging its arms around, making it even harder to get close. And of course, it tried to pin me in the corner with as much resolve as ever. I defeated it using a combination of tail whips and heat beam spamming. I defeated them and was going to fight Titanosaurus, but when I got to the Titanosaurus fight, he was nowhere to be seen. The game had simply went back to the map with Titanosaurus piece now missing. There was no one left to fight but Biollante now, so I eagerly started the battle. I was quite surprised that Biolante started out in her rose form. She was immobile and used tentacles to keep me away from the main body, which took the most damage. As expected, she turned into her final form after taking enough damage. The sprite looked pretty damn good for 8-bit. The battle technique was the same, except now Biolante could move, albeit slower than any other monster. Being hit by the tentacles did more damage now, and Biolante could spit acid, which I managed to avoid by jumping in the screen cap. Not much more difficult than Titanosaurus. It only took me 2 rounds. But when Biolante was gone, the music stopped, and there was a new icon replacing the bass. This icon wasn't there before I beat Biolante. It resembled a red tribal mask, and I had a feeling of dread when I saw it. But since it replaced the bass, it must be the only way to exit Pathos. I moved Godzilla to the square and started the level. It was a hellish looking place with no sky, and flickering fire in the background. It looked a lot more advanced than anything I've seen on the NES. The background ambience was a form of slow and steady drums sounding like a heartbeat. All the text at the top of the screen and the life bar were gone, and were replaced by a simple bit of text in the middle of the screen that said run. My feeling of dread intensified. I cautiously walked through the level, but like the Blue Mountains, there were no enemies. I paced around for a minute, thinking, run? From what? The first time it hit me, I didn't even see it. I heard a noise outside my room and turned back to see if something fell, but when I looked back, Godzilla was dying. I figured it must have been a glitch, but I wasn't going to play through the game without Godzilla. So I restarted the game and went to the password screen. Have I ever mentioned how creepy the password music is? If you played the game, you know what I mean. It doesn't at all fit the mood of the game. It's something out of a horror game than anything. Maybe they did it that way so the kids wouldn't cheat? I don't know. I was quite annoyed at this point because I thought I had to go through the fight all the monsters again, but that wasn't the case. The game started me off right before I started the red face level. So I tried again, making sure to pay more attention this time. That's when I heard a low, bellowing sound. And then I saw it. This thing. Do you know that feeling your body has when you feel like you're in extreme danger? You start to recoil and tense up as adrenaline flows through your veins, and your nerves start to feel cold. That's the feeling I had when I took the screen cap. I haven't seen all the Godzilla movies, but I'm pretty damn sure that this thing was never in any of them. It had to be something that the creators had made up, but what kind of sick fuck would put this in a kid's game? By sheer dumb luck, or perhaps an adrenaline boost, I managed to run far enough to get away from it. It ran very fast, so much so that if you saw it, you were almost certainly going to die. And when I say die, I mean your monster gets killed instantly if the creature touches you. Once I had gotten back to the map, I was so afraid that I was extremely tempted to shut off a game and just try to pretend it didn't happen. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. It couldn't have been real. But even if I wanted to continue, I still had to get Mothra through this chase level. But as I stayed inactive on the map screen for a few minutes, my fear was replaced with burning curiosity. What the hell had just happened? What was the rest of the game like? I had to beat this level with Mothra and then I was on to the next world. But when I moved Mothra to the red face, The game registered it as me beating the level. I was quite relieved. I tried to prepare myself for this next world. Trance. I was still pretty shook up after what happened in the last level when I started playing Trance. Trance's map music didn't do anything to ease the tension. As for how to describe it, have you heard the theme from Videodrome? That's the closest I can think of to compare it to. I checked to see what the new monster was, and it was Orga. A monster didn't make his film debut until 2000. Appearing in the game in 1988? So much for my theories about Titanosaurus and Biolante. There's no way this game was made in 1988. These guys at Toho may be smart, but I'm sure they couldn't see that far into the future. If they could, then they wouldn't have gave Ronald Emmerich the rights to make a Godzilla movie. I mean, no. This had to be some kind of hack, which just opened so many more questions. Who made this hack? When? How? And most importantly, why? The why was the question that bothered me the most. My immediate assumption was to think that Billy did this to pull a joke on me, but that couldn't be right. Billy didn't know how to make a ROM hack, and if he did, he'd probably just do something simple and stupid, like replacing all the monsters with crudely jawed genitalia. Unless Billy had an amazing game editing skill and a serious dark streak to his imagination that he never told me about, he couldn't have made this. Aside from all that, my eye was drawn to the new icon on the map, a question mark. I was really curious about what it did, and I'm sure you are all too. So I'll explain the quiz levels now, since this was when they started showing up. There was one per map from here on, and they appeared near the start of the map. When you start a quiz level, you appear on a screen like this. As you can see, there's a question at the top, a yes or no button, and an emoticon at the center. I refer to the emoticon as face. Real creative, I know. And for convenience, I will refer to face as the one asking the questions. The music for the quiz levels was a track that was actually in the original game. It's the one that plays when you try the Ghidorah cheat and get sent to an unplayable level. Face asks 12 yes or no questions, and you move your monsters to the buttons for the answer. When you attack, the question disappears and Face changes expression for about 8 seconds. He goes back to a neutral state and then comes up with another question. There was no time limit, nor any right or wrong answers. Face had no respect for a person's personal boundaries, and will sometimes ask deeply disturbing and personal questions. For example, do you like hurting people? Have you ever... or... anyone? Have you ever been... by a family member? Other times, he would ask questions that were either mind-numbingly stupid or just flat-out ridiculous. Is the sun hot? Is water wet? Does your dog like the president? And maybe once per quiz, Face would actually ask you a question about the game. With one exception, Face's changed expressions seemed to have no effect on the game, except for indicating what the game creator thought of your answers, I assume. His reactions rarely made any sense, and at first I thought they were just randomly generated. The questions never had a pattern. Face never stayed on one subject longer than more than 2 seconds. Early on I thought the questions he was asking would build up to something, but then he'd ask some stupid garbage. Here are some of the expressions of Face that I saw while playing. I'll separate them into 2 categories. The expressions I understood, and the ones I didn't. First, the expressions I understood. Number 1 was neutral, his default expression. Number 2, angry. If you try to attack Face, his expression changes to this, but nothing happens. 3, sad. 4, happy. 5, sick. 6, maniacal. Face made this expression when he was being an asshole. You'll see what I mean later. 7, surprised. 8, love. 9, annoying. 10, confused. And 11, guilty or hurt. Here are the other ones. 2 of these appeared only once, number 1 and number 12, and I suspected they might have been in-jokes from the creator. The respective questions are, do you like ice cream and are you a tough guy? As for the questions in the first quiz, luckily I had a notepad and pen ready. I have problems remembering things, so I often carry one around and jot things down, or sometimes I doodle in it when I'm bored. When the first quiz started, I thought I'd record what happened. I'm glad I did. Here are the first series of questions, answers, and Face's reactions. Do you like the game? Yes. Reaction happy. Are you afraid? Yes. Reaction surprised. Are you over 18? Yes. Weird face number 5. Do birds have teeth? No. Reaction love. Is peanut butter good? No. Reaction sick. Does the moon rotate? Yes. Weird face number 11. Have you had a job? Yes. Reaction confused. Do you like hurting people? No. Reaction annoyed. Is the sun hot? Yes. Answer sad. Do you like dogs? Yes. Reaction happy. Is the president good? Yes. Weird face number 3. Does your dog like the president? No. Reaction angry. Now that I've explained all that, it's time for the actual gameplay. After the quiz level, I tried the new green temple icon first. Wow. Maybe this is why the game was so weird. One of the designers was clearly drugged out of its mind. Jokes aside, I was actually quite impressed with the graphics of this level, as disorienting as they were. But I hate those creepy blank staring statue faces. The music had a hypnotic Indian techno vibe to it. There were 2 new enemies in this level. A flying ghost type thing with a trunk, and a bat with a horse skull for a face. They appear at random, and I was lucky to get a screen cap of them both. I then proceeded to a blue mountain level, expecting another nice, calm stroll. I took my time walking through and was completely taken by surprise when this happened. Count Mulgara came speeding towards me and took off quite a bit of health. It took me 2 minutes to kill him without having any worry about the time limit. But the boss monsters never showed up in the scrolling levels in the original game. I was then worried as to what other rules the game would break. After another Blue Mountain stage, it was time for a fight with Not Varen, whose replacement was one of the most bizarre things I've seen so far. This strange creature attacks by kicking and also opens up its chest to fire heat-seeking missiles. I still don't get it. The missiles were sometimes a pain to deal with, but I found out you can tail whip them out of their way. Not Varen was probably the easiest of the boss monster replacements. The same could not be said, however, for Not Ghidorah. Apparently the source of the horse bats, Not Ghidorah was the most aggravatingly difficult monster to fight yet, mostly because of his special ability. He could shriek and then summon a small swarm of those horse bat things. I know there's only 2 in the screen cap, but every time he did this, there would be about 10. The AI took advantage of this distraction and attacked twice as fast with the horse bats flying around. Once that annoyance was over with, I went back to the green temple level to kill some enemies and restore my health. Interestingly, the horse bats never showed up after I killed Not Ghidorah, and that gave me an idea. If killing all the monsters makes the red face show up, what would happen if I avoided fighting Orga? So I gave it a try. The game told me there was no monster there when I tried to start the base level, and immediately afterwards, the game took control of my Godzilla piece and moved it in front of Orga. My little trick didn't work, so I tried to prepare myself for another chase. But first I had to beat Orga. The fight with Orga confirmed another thing. Whoever created this game hack was clearly a Godzilla fan. Not only because he picked a monster like Orga, but because they actually implemented something that happened in Godzilla 2000. Orga's primary attacks were a punch and a heat beam from his shoulder cavity. But once you had him down to half his health, he started doing something new. He would expand his jaws and try to swallow Godzilla, in the process stealing all your health and energy. But in doing so, he gave himself a new weakness, firing a heat beam into his mouth that would take a devastating 4 bars off his life meter. With the weakness revealed, I soon beat Orga, and despite how much I hoped otherwise, the red face appeared, and the music stopped. I readied myself the best I could, and I started the level. And seeing how it was basically the same as the first, I didn't waste a millisecond before hauling ass. I soon encountered obstacles in the form of ground tiles suspended in the air. Most of them you could jump over or destroy, others you had to crouch under. About 40 seconds into it, I heard the horrible bellowing roar and saw the spider beast following close behind me. Stacks of obstacles could barely slow it down. It would back up and charge its way through, smashing them into bits. And when the smaller obstacles got in its way, it would expand its jaw and swallow them whole. I was afraid, but with fast thinking and faster button pressing, I escaped him yet again. I felt really excited, so I laughed and said, "Not this time, asshole," and decided to take a screen cap for celebration. But when I said that sentence, just before the level ended, it looked at me. A wave of mortal terror overtook me again, and I sure as hell wasn't laughing anymore. I took a screen cap up to the next level title right before I rushed to the bathroom to splash some water on my face, and to take a piss that I nearly failed to contain when that fucking thing looked at me. When I got back to the game, I was very upset and confused. I thought about the way the monster looked at me. The game couldn't have heard what I said. That's impossible. It had to have been a random occurrence, but why did it happen precisely the moment I insulted the monster? Nothing about this game made any sense. The new Godzilla monsters, the weird replacement monsters, out-of-place imagery like the Green Temple, quiz levels, the red monster chases. It didn't add up to anything meaningful. It was a prank, it wasn't funny in any way I can understand, and they clearly put too much effort into it. If they were trying to make a genuine sequel to the Godzilla game with new monsters, then why did they add everything else? Maybe it's some kind of art experiment. Some group project made by a bunch of really talented and crazy people. They lost the cartridge somehow? Or maybe they intended a random person to find it. It was all just fruitless guessing. As far as I can tell, there was only one way to figure out what the deal was with the game. And that was to play it all the way to the end. Maybe, just maybe, there would be some kind of something in the credits. An explanation by the creators as to why they made this. Maybe it could be something more cryptic and strange. Maybe something horrifying. Before I got a good look at the Dementia board, I considered replaying Trance to see if the red monster would look at me again, but I decided against it. I wanted to keep moving forward. I was somewhat worried that backtracking might cause the game to become even more strange. The Dementia board sounded a lot like the Saturn music, except it was slowed down and played with a piano-sounding instrument. Like most of these new math themes, it had a dangerous, suspenseful feel. While I listened to the music, I looked at the Dementia board. There was 4 monsters this time: Space Godzilla, Manda, Gigan, and Baragon. I was surprised to see 2 new Toho monsters this time, but the best surprise was still yet to come. I started the quiz level, and here's a list of the results in the same format as the last one. Can you swim? Yes. Reaction happy. Do you like fish? Yes. Reaction sick. Can penguins fly? No. Reaction sad. Can it spin in all directions? There was no clarification of what face meant by it, so I just guessed. No. Reaction surprised. Do you breathe oxygen? Yes. Reaction. Weird face number 8. Does it taste good when you bite a woman? I don't know who came up with this question, but I really hope they're getting mental help. No. Reaction annoyed. Is it night where you are? Yes. Reaction. Weird face number 6. Do you like cats? Yes. Reaction confused. Is water wet? Yes. Reaction angry. Have you ever broken a bone? No. Reaction happy. Do you like your job? Yes. Reaction hurt. Would you like a new monster? Yes. Weird face number 11. I wasn't entirely sure at the time what face meant by new monster, but I couldn't resist answering yes, just to see what would happen. The result was mind-blowing. The game took me back to the board, and I had a new playable monster in the form of Anguirus. Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to play as Anguirus since he was my second favorite Godzilla monster, and plus I never liked Mothra all that much. I moved my new Anguirus piece to the level right next to it, eager to try out my new monster. Before I get into level description, let me talk about Anguirus a little bit. Using the up and down buttons, you could choose whether Anguirus stood in his bipedal stance or crawled around on all 4s. It wasn't a huge difference, but being able to stand was helpful in boss fights. and crawling sometimes helped dodge obstacles and attacks. He could punch and kick like Godzilla, but no tail whip. Instead, he had something far more interesting. An ability to curl up into a spike ball of death and roll around. Could still take damage, but it was lessened. It was a good way to clear out stage enemies, but unfortunately, doing this also drained the power bar. But the spike ball wasn't the only special ability he had. If you press start, he would fire a beam of energy out of his mouth that resembled Titanosaurus's sonar attack. And if this was a hack, it might have been inspired by the roar attack from Atari's Godzilla fighting games. Also of note is that when I was playing Gears, the level meter gets glitched up. Judging by the life bar, I'd say it's about level 10. Now, onto the level. These levels are a green palette swap of the ground and background tiles from the Blue Mountains. But what immediately caught my attention was the water, which had a transparency effect. Was that even possible in an NES game? I know Super Nintendo can do it, but I had never seen a transparency effect in a game on the NES before. The Green Mountains music was played with a similar instrument to the Blue Mountains, but the melody was totally different. It's a very simple song with abrupt pauses, followed by a loud note every few seconds. Anyway, I went through the usual stroll of level, and again there was no monsters or anything. But pretty soon I had reached a cliff above the water. There was nowhere to go but down into the water, so I went. The water transparency made things harder to see, but it's tolerable. After going underwater, I encountered two new enemies, a giant piranha and some kind of spiky bottom feeder thing. I liked the piranha because I could easily tell what it was. It was the same enemy design that would appear in a real game, and there were very few enemies like this. It didn't take many hits to kill, but they were quite annoying and considerably trimmed down your life if they got too close. They tend to travel in packs. As for the bottom feeders, they're easy to deal with. They swim along the bottom of the screen towards you, and are easily crushed by the roll attack or jumped over. In this screen cap, you can see me about to run one of them over, and there's a pack of piranha behind it. After I beat the level, I moved Godzilla to a blue castle icon. When I started the level, I got a title on the screen with the text, Unforgiving Cold. The level itself looked like a castle dungeon made with blue blocks, with rows of identical white statue faces on the walls. The statue faces had a permanent look of horror on their faces. There was also some flickering gray static, which didn't really seem to obscure my vision, but it added another unsettling mood to these levels. The music was a 12-second loop of a low-pitched choir vocalizing. It sounded very familiar to me. Whenever I played one of these levels, I'd get this sudden, horrible feeling of anxiety. I had the feeling that the further I progressed into the level, the closer I would be getting something unspeakably evil. There weren't any enemies, but these were some of the longest levels in the game. I only played one level, but it took me 7 minutes to complete. I didn't want to admit myself at the time, but I realized something while playing the Blue Castle level. This game has the power to make the player feel certain things. I don't mean in a sense that you get irritated playing a crappy game, or get unnerved by something scary that happened in the game. What I mean is that certain events of the game can instantly make you start feeling something. I know that sounds completely insane, and I don't blame you for not believing me. I wouldn't believe any of this if I didn't play the game for myself. But there is something very, very wrong with this game, and I just don't know how to explain it. It's time for the fight with Baragon's replacement. Although Baragon was originally the smallest monster of the game, his replacement has to be the largest. It was so tall in fact that the ground was noticeably lowered, and not Baragon's head was still barely avoiding the collision with the bar above the screen. He was just as frighteningly bizarre as he was huge. You may be wondering how he attacks with no arms. Well, he does have a pretty powerful kick, the most powerful in the game, but his other fighting technique is much stranger. First he blasts a cloudy breath of pixels down on you, which causes you to freeze. Then he walks to the right corner of the screen and extends a large Gatling gun from his abdomen. This might seem amusing to you, but it certainly wasn't to me in the moment of playing the game. This attack was almost annoying as Gigan saw, and not Baragon could have been unbeatable if he continuously used it. Thankfully he only did it twice while fighting him. Once you unfreeze, you can run up to him and start damaging the gun, which seems to do extra damage to him. This helped me destroy him, and then it was time for the third level type. I decided I was going to use Anguirus to fight Manda and Gigan, and then fight Space Godzilla as Godzilla. I mean, it was only fitting. Before I get to the battles, however, let me describe the third level type. The Arctic. The Arctic is exactly what you'd get from this area. An icy tundra with a few watery segments. The song reminded me a bit of Northern Hemispheres from Donkey Kong Country in an 8-bit form. A very dangerous sounding song. It made me think of being trapped in the tundra, freezing to death. There were no new enemies on the stage. The first was a creature frozen in a block of ice. They block your way and you had to use a heat beam to thaw them out. They look a little bit like a smaller version of Nagazora, but without the eye. When freed, they do a strange crawling movement and push you back. It doesn't cause any damage, but it's kind of annoying. After dealing with the Icemen, I kept walking for a minute or two and came upon a water segment. I jumped in, and this time I managed to get a screen cap showing the water splashes when you jump in. Don't know how they programmed this, but it's pretty impressive. Another interesting thing is how the screen changes focus when you go underwater. Here you can see another new enemy type, a little thing I like to call the Spike Walker. They walk towards you and explode randomly, or instantly if you attack them, sending spikes in every direction. The spikes don't do much damage, but they might get me dangerously close to falling into a pit a few times. Oh, speaking of pits. Down into the water, the game has platformer element, bottomless pits. There weren't any of these in the original game since the game was strictly an action game, but the pits were a nice addition. After getting back on land, I encountered an unexpected mini-boss, Maguma, the walrus kaiju. I know this game has had some pretty obscure monsters to begin with, but wow. Not that I was complaining, it was a pretty cool cameo and an unexpected kaiju. Maguma's fighting tactics were pretty simple. He had a freeze beam and he could charge into you. Not very challenging, but certainly more entertaining than the Motango mini-boss in the original game. One really interesting thing is that Maguma is that he doesn't die when you defeat him. He just turns tail and retreats. This is the first time I'd seen an enemy monster change direction, let alone retreat. I tried chasing after him, but he disappeared into the water. Poor bastard. I'll talk about the Manda fight next. I forgot to mention it before, but the music that plays during new monster fights are just reused themes from the original game. So far the themes have been Titanosaurus, Gazora's music, Violante, Hedorah's music, Orga, Baragon, and Mogira's music, Manda, Varen's music, Space Godzilla, Mecha-Godzilla's music. As for the fight with Manda, he was a pretty crafty opponent. When it realized one tactic was ineffective, it would immediately start going to a different one. Manda used quite a few tricks, like spitting fire, biting, and the most irritating of all, constricting. It doesn't mercilessly drain your life down like Gigan's Cutter, but it was by far Manda's strongest attack. One last thing to note, and it was pretty cool, was that the Atragon showed up during the fight to help me out. Manda crushed it with ease, but it was still pretty cool. After I slayed Manda, I played through an Arctic level for health power-ups, and then it was on to fight Gigan's replacement. When the fight started, I was very confused, because there was nothing there. I thought it was going to be like the second Titanosaurus fight in Pathos, but just about time I would have come back to the map, a piranha appeared on screen, but it wasn't there for very long. As soon as it appeared, the speakers emitted an ear-splitting screech, and not Gigan flew in and ripped the poor fish to pieces. Well, it was one way to get the player on their toes. That abrupt entrance scared the hell out of me, and my adrenaline was rushing, which in retrospect was a good thing, because Not Gigan was one of the fastest and most unrelenting opponent in the game. Not Gigan was tough, but my new skills with Anguirus held me even to score. This was still an incredibly intense fight. Not Gigan's attacks consisted of some kind of blood laser he spews out of his mouth, and a downward slash. I was expecting some hellish variant of the buzzsaw attacks, but thankfully there was none to be seen. The Howl attack was invaluable in defeating him. I would have taken more screen caps to the fight, but I really had to concentrate. After that, it was one more monster to take down. Space Godzilla. Space Godzilla's fighting technique was rather frustrating. Space Godzilla would use his energy to create two flying crystals, which when reached the ground became crystal spires. These spires not only blocked you from reaching Space Godzilla, but also allowed him to constantly recharge to full energy, and blast you with a deadly fully charged Corona Beam until you broke the spires. Space Godzilla would eventually drain his own spires of energy until they shattered, but if you waited too long for that to happen, you'd probably lose a lot of life. Heat beams seemed to re-energize the spires, so I had to use physical attacks. When he finally got close enough to hit Space Godzilla, it was no pushover. When I punched him, he would hit me back just as hard. Space Godzilla does anything in his power to knock you back into the left corner of the screen so he can create more spires. By the time it was all over, I only had 5 life bars left. But it didn't matter, because I didn't need to fight anymore. I needed to run. Here we go again. I decided right then that I really wanted to see the end of the game. As terrifying as these levels could be sometimes, I had to beat them to get through. For this chase level, I tried out Anguirus since his roll attack allowed me to move faster than Godzilla or Mothra. The chase started off like the first two, except there was a river of blood below the ground. I was beginning to get the hang of it, and the extra speed from the roll attack helped me get the edge on the red monster. Especially since I don't think I have to worry about a power limit, and can keep rolling endlessly. Like the previous levels with water, the ground inevitably reached to a stop, so I rolled into the blood. To my surprise, the hell beast didn't go after me. It stopped right at the edge of the ground and grimaced. I guess I can't swim, I thought to myself. So I went under blood, I suppose, and continued moving. There wasn't anything around, but I knew something was up. The chase wasn't going to end that easily, could it? Surely something else would show up, and sure enough, I heard the bellowing roar, sounding slightly different. The monster was following me in a new aquatic body. I had no idea it was a shapeshifter. But after it reappeared, the chase started getting into a difficulty I expected. Being submerged slowed me down, putting me in the beast at the same speed. The only thing that would keep me alive was fast thinking and reflexes. I encountered some bottomless pits, in which mines floated up from. I assumed if you hit one, it would not only damage you, but knock you back. Considering how fast the red monster swims, hitting these mines would be an instant death, but that wasn't all I had to be wary of. Halfway through the chase, the hell beast revealed yet another surprise. A tentacle formed of intestine and topped with a clawed set of jaws bursting from its mouth. I only barely avoided both the tentacles and the mines, but I could tell that the beast was getting desperate because the chase was nearly over. After about a minute later, I had spotted a bit of ground that served as an exit. I leaped with all my might as I could muster without breaking my controller. The beast screamed with rage and jumped out of the river. It was one last attempt to drag me down, but I escaped its grasp. I fell back into my bed with a deep breath and satisfied from yet another successful escape. Now I was headed to the fifth world. Entropy. In the original game, the sixth world was Pluto. Ironically, despite being the smallest planet, Pluto was the largest and most diverse world in the game. Entropy had a different layout, but was similarly huge and diverse. The board music was being played by a violin instrument, a melody that started out sounding mournful, but then gets rather, I guess I would call it distorted. It made me feel depressed and unnerved. Not something I would like to hear trying to fall asleep. Strangely, none of the levels from the previous worlds were here. Instead, they were brand new icons. The bosses this time were Magellan, Batra, and Mecha-Godzilla. As usual, the first thing I did was the quiz level for another interrogation from Face, but when I got there, I noticed something different. Instead of the usual goofy Ghidorah music, it was playing the password theme. The music change seemed to be intentional because after the first two questions at the start, the quiz seemed to take on a much darker tone. Do you like ice cream? Yes. Weird face number 1. Do you like clowns? Yes. Weird face number 10. Is time slipping through your fingers? Yes. Weird face number 2. Do you have any regrets? Yes. Reaction hurt. Do some people deserve to die? No. Weird face number 3. Is it safe to go out at night? Yes. Weird face number 5. Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Yes. Weird face number 9. Have you ever... anyone? No. Weird face number 7. Do you want to... anyone? No. Reaction angry. Are you actually accomplishing anything? No. Weird face number 4. Does life have any meaning? No. Reaction love. Do you like Mothra? No. Reaction maniacal. I know that last one was going to be a gameplay related question, but I had no idea what the result would be. I answered honestly, because as I said before, I never really liked Mothra. Nobody liked playing as Mothra in the game. There was no really good reason for it. Every other time Mothra gets hit, she gets slammed to the back left corner of the screen. She sucks at fighting because her attacks are so weak. The only benefit to Mothra was always that she could fly over obstacles in some levels. So I answered no. And Face actually replied to me, not only with a maniacal expression, but with the text, "Too bad." I was taken back to the map screen and I was shocked to see that Godzilla and Anguirus had disappeared from the board, leaving only Mothra. Face had just fucked me over. Needless to say, I was pissed. But there wasn't anything I could do. I'm willing to bet if I had said yes, it still would have stuck with Mothra anyway. Face giveth and face taketh away, I suppose. I took a deep breath and got ready to explore. There were 2 paths I could take on the board. I decided to take the lower one, and this turned out to be a good choice for reasons I'll get to momentarily. The first world had me in some kind of forest, so I started there. Almost immediately, I get an eerie feeling. There was something in this level that seemed off to me, even more than the previous ones. Maybe it was the pitch-black background. I've always been afraid of the forest at night. Something about those trees made me feel surrounded and vulnerable. The fact that I was stuck with Mothra didn't help. Part of the game's previous world as Godzilla gave me the feeling of bravery, being in control of the king of monsters. I'd be able to handle just about anything that gets in my way. But it's not like that with Mothra. No feeling of strength, no security. I'm just weak, easily overwhelmed bug, traversing into the unknown. The music had no instruments, sounding like woodlands, followed by a slow, rhythmic drum beat and chiming bells, gave me the feeling that I was intruding on some dangerous place I really shouldn't be in. After a while, I encountered the first enemies on the stage, or at least I thought they were enemies. They were strange, long-legged deer-like creatures, and instead of attacking, they would just idly walk around. I went to approach them, and they ran away. I thought about shooting one of the creatures with my eye beams to see what would happen, but it seemed wrong. These creatures were harmless. They weren't doing anything. So I just passed over them and continued through the level. About halfway through, I encountered groups of deer-like animals and 2 new creatures, a sloth-like creature with a long beak on a tree and a hairy raptor-esque beast that were preying on the deer. It was very surreal to watch these creatures interact. It didn't feel like I was playing a video game anymore, but rather I was traveling through a forest in some other dimension. The creatures ignored me for the most part, although the raptors did attack me when I got too close or if I attacked them first. I know I shot at one of them to help one of the deer creatures escape, and I got clawed at. The confrontation was easily avoided by flying up into the top screen. After that, I had to choose whether I wanted to play the levels with the hourglass or on the TV screen. And I picked the latter. What I got was not at all expected. When I pressed the button to start the level on the TV screen, this animation popped up. There was also the music in the background, which was the Goofy Gador music that used to play in the quiz levels. I was somewhat unsettled by this, but it was so strange. I also found it a bit spooky because I had a shirt that looked just like that when I was a kid. You can go back to the board by pressing any button. After that, I had no idea what to expect from the rest of these icons. I went to the hourglass icon next. I was somewhat relieved when an actual level came up. It was certainly unorthodox looking, all brown and with time-measuring instruments floating in the air, gigantic grandfather clocks in the background. The music was the same as the board screen, and very early in the game I encountered something that I didn't expect to see. Original enemies from the game. Not only that, but it seemed like it was a whole fleet of them, and the yellow tanks that were normally immobile could now move. I took some damage, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. The most interesting thing about the level was the colored hourglass items. There were 3 of these. A blue hourglass that had slowed time down and filled the level with enemies from the past. A red hourglass, time speed up and filled the level of enemies from the future. And a green hourglass that set time to normal speed and filled original game enemies. I encountered the blue hourglass first. As stated, the game would slow down and I saw enemies from the past, which were 5 different types of prehistoric animals. I didn't know much about prehistory, but I believe these enemies represent real animals. The level went on into another segment, and I encountered a green hourglass, and then I fought original enemies again. It was the same 5 types, so I didn't take any screenshots, but the last segment I encountered was the red hourglass, and enemies that I believe are to be from the future. Now, whether or not the game was showing me 8-bit renditions of creatures that will exist in thousands of years of the Earth's future, I have no idea. But that thought in mind, I found this particular segment very eerie. It was made even more tense because everything moved so much faster. One of the future enemies bore a striking resemblance to something I had saw in a book once called the Trudon Man. Another one looked like some kind of organic spaceship. There was only one of the 5th type of future creatures, and when it appeared, the others ran for their lives, leaving me alone to battle it. It could fly, but the sprite didn't move, and its single attack was firing a lightning bolt from its face. Even so, it was surprisingly powerful, and I suppose it could be considered a mini-boss. After defeating it, it left a health power-up that restored both my health and energy I had lost when fighting it. It seemed like I would need all the help I can get to beat this world with Mothra alone. After the previous stage I called Time Warp, this next stage appeared to be a toxic waste dump. As you can see, the place looked grungy and inhospitable. The music was a short looping of an ambient synthesizer song. Listening to it, it made me feel like I had snuffed toxic fumes myself. It was starting to mess with my head the whole time. I even felt like I was choking while I'm playing this level. The enemies all seem to be mutated to some degree. In the above screenshot, you can see the green mummies with bird skulls that jump out of the toxic waste. There's also brownish cow skeleton monsters with spider legs. Halfway to the level, I saw one of the deers from the forest. It was alone, and when I saw it, it was drinking toxic waste out of a barrel with an anteater-like tongue. I was moving over to try to make a stop, but this flock of skull birds came out of nowhere and started attacking. The deer was scared by this and ended up running off the ground into the toxic waste. I genuinely felt bad for it. One of the birds bit me, but I regained some health quickly by killing it. They were rather weak. I pressed onward. Of all the levels in Entropy, this was the most normal in the game. There was a little deviance from the move forward smash things formula of the original game. I encountered more creatures through the level, like tentacled blobs and some kind of deformed thing with human-like teeth. I didn't feel like provoking them into a fight, so I kept flying to the top of the screen. At the end of the level, there was a large bluish-green lake, and there I encountered another mini-boss. Some kind of monster with a long neck and a whale skull. It attacked with the mouth projectiles and by charging into you. It could also go underneath the water and rapidly emerge from a different place. It was harder to beat than the boss in Time Warp levels. It had a lot more health because it must have taken me 3 minutes to defeat it. It let out a loud noise when it died, and then sank to the bottom into the water as it left the screen. Back on the board, I went to the nearest level icon I hadn't seen yet, which was a white tree. As I guessed, it was a winter-themed recolor of the forest stage. But unlike the forest stage, I didn't feel unnerved by this one. I think the music had a lot to do with it. It was a gentle, calm song. It almost sounded romantic. It was quite stress relieving, to be honest, and the forest itself looked a lot less ominous when covered in snow. I traveled through the final segment, enjoying the atmosphere for 4 minutes, when I suddenly realized something. I haven't seen a single creature since I started the level. Where are all the animals? Soon after I left the screen, the next segment started. In the second segment, it was still the winter forest, but now the music was gone. I was starting to feel suspicious, and then I reminded myself that there were other empty levels in this game, and this was likely another one of those. But then I heard something familiar. It was the 12-second looping music from Unforgiving Cold. I could feel my heart sink as I came across a horrific sight. A whole number of the dead deer creature covered in snow. Judging from the blackish blue tone of their skin, they must have frozen to death. Upon closer inspection, some of them were missing body parts. Now I was frightened, but I still had to keep going. Before exiting the level, I was really hoping to see something resembling the previous forest animals in a living state. And sure enough, I did. It was a creature much like the beaked sloth, except this time it had white fur and was more like a beaked gorilla. It was walking very slowly when I saw it, but I was at least happy to see something alive. However, it didn't stay that way for very long. A pack of raptors who must have sensed something was still alive came rushing from the right side of the screen. The beaked gorilla didn't stand a chance, and one of the raptors immediately lunged and ripped open its back legs. These winter raptors act far different from their tempered relatives. While the other raptors only attacked for hunting prey, or when provoked, the winter raptors seemed to have gone insane. They attacked everything on sight. They were running back and forth, clawing at nothing. Even the noises they made sounded different, more high-pitched and enraged. As I left the second segment, I saw two raptors fighting to the death. They were both covered in injuries, and one of the raptors had been blinded in one eye. I took a screenshot, but I didn't stay around to see who won the fight. I only had one more segment to get through before I can go back to the board screen, but in this segment I was no longer in a white forest, but instead a very empty, grassy plain, with a bright gray moon in the sky. The pleasant music of Winter Forest Part 1 had returned, and immediately I started feeling dread. This is going to sound crazy, but it's the absolute truth. The game made this level from one of my memories. After a long stretch of nothing, I reached a lake, and then the moon moved down from the sky and began hatching like an egg. When it did, a curled up humanoid figure fell into the lake as the moon had disintegrated. I heard a splash when it hit the water, then a moment of silence. Then the screen began to shake, and a new creature emerged from the water. And thus I was introduced to the monster I call the Moon Beast. This was the only screenshot I took, as I was focusing all my concentration on winning the fight, and it was the most difficult fight yet. Stronger than any of the previous bosses. This creature would have been hard to take down with Godzilla, and with Mothra, it seemed nearly impossible. I suppose I would consider myself fortunate that the beast lacked any attacks like the Gigan saw. But if it had anything like that, I never would have won the fight. I barely had 3 bars of health left when I finally killed this abomination. But what happened afterwards is hardly what I could call a reward. I have been trying to keep my promise and suppress this memory for years, but it seems as if I have to get it off my chest. I'll just tell you the important parts, because I don't like bringing this up. Unless I have to. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend named Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would just stand or sit perfectly still, and her face would instantly lose any expression she had before. She would speak very clearly, without a hint of emotion. When it was over, she would start trembling and sometimes bury her face in her hands. I can't really convey the feeling that it gave me in words, and I won't even try. You had to see it in person to understand. Despite this, she was a very kind person and I cared for her dearly. We liked to hang out in the field at night and look up at the stars. But one night, she didn't say anything to me at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but she suddenly sprung up and ran into traffic. I tried to stop her, but it was too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. I looked her right in the eyes when the wheels went over her neck. That sight has haunted me for years. I know that the game knows about it, because after I defeated the Moon Beast, this happened. After that, the game went back to the board screen. It was all I could do not to burst out screaming. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the controller. I knew the game was going to test me if I kept playing, but I had no idea it would go this far, or that he was even capable of doing this. I could feel my brain going haywire as if I asked myself, did the game just read my mind? It didn't seem possible, but what other explanation was there? It was then that I could no longer deny what now seemed obvious. The game was alive. And not only that, it could also establish some kind of mental connection to the player. And yet I couldn't conceive myself to stop playing. I don't know if the game was messing with my mind or just my stubborn curiosity, but even with the previous revelation, I really wanted to see this game to the end, even more than I did before I beat Dementia. Terrifying as it might be, even dangerous, I knew if I quit playing the game, I would never be able to stop thinking about it. If I tried resetting the game, it might go back to normal again. How many people ever get to witness something like this firsthand, let alone being able to take screenshots of the whole thing? Fucked up as it was, this was an experience of a lifetime. But even so, I couldn't take the chances with my health. I had the TV remote right next to me, ready to turn off the TV in case I felt like it was in actual danger. And if that didn't work, I would pull the plug from the wall or just run out of my room. Surely that would be enough. Whatever powers the game has, it seems to have been confined to what it could show on the TV, and whatever its mental connection could do. The latter was what worried me. I still didn't know what I was dealing with, and I wasn't about to underestimate it. I took a break for the few minutes to calm my nerves, and then it was back to the game. Speaking of TVs, there was a TV icon right next to the white forest I had just left. Because the first animation was so bizarre, I figured I'd try to see what happens. Although I expected the same animation, I actually got a totally different one. Weird. The music for this one was the Neptune board theme. Fitting, I suppose, since it's a fishman and all, but I can't help but wonder what the point of these things even are. There was one more TV screen icon, so I figured it must have a unique animation of its own. I was going to make sure to see what it was before leaving Entropy. But first, it was timed for another level. The golden brick icon was the closest thing, so I went there. It started in a golden labyrinth level. The health and power bar were refilled. Not sure how or why, but I was glad to not be heading into the unknown nearly dead. I also noticed that Mothra's sprite was shrunk to half its original size. The music was slow and ominous drum beat, with female vocals kicking in at about a minute into it. Quite haunting, to be honest. The gold labyrinth itself was an anomaly. I'm not sure how this level would have played off if it was using Godzilla or Ingirius, because flying seemed to be the necessary way to get around. Another thing that caught my attention was when you go left, your monster actually turns and faces the left. It sounds stupid, obviously, but in the original game, you were only supposed to move to the right, so when you tried to move to the left, your monster just ended up walking or flying backwards. This level was apparently gigantic in size, because every time I thought I would reach the end of it, or I thought I'd end up going back to where I started, I encountered something totally new. Things like lava blockades, new enemies, and statued faces. I also found one statue face at a dead end with a wide, open-eyed stare. The night Melissa died, she had this exact expression on her face. Even when she got hit by the truck, she still made the same expression. I can't help but feel like something really is staring back at me from the screen when I look at it. I really didn't want to be reminded of that night anymore, so I left the statue as soon as I found it. I needed to find the exit anyway, which proved to be no simple task. It felt like this level stretched on forever in all directions. I must have wandered the level for at least 15 minutes before I actually saw something. It was a creature that wasn't golden, seemingly the only one of its kind in this level. Lacking any kind of hover ability like the other creatures, it just walked back and forth on the platform. But it wasn't long after I found it that a flying machine swooped in and grabbed it, and flew off. The machine apparently had not seen me, so I decided to follow, to see where it was taking the creature. The machine stopped at a room with a large cauldron-like object in the center. The machine hovered over the cauldron and dropped the creature into it. The creature emerged from the hole of the cauldron's side, now adorned in the same gold color as everything else. The machine flew off, and I'm not really sure what to make of it, but I'm glad I came upon it because I found the exit soon after. When I got back to the board, I realized the bosses hadn't moved at all. A bit odd, but it didn't bother me. It made planning my route through Entropy easier. There were still two new icons I hadn't yet explored, the Indigo Cliffs and a black version of the labyrinth. Since there was only 3 black labyrinths, which were surrounded by bosses, I played the Indigo Glyphs first. It was like the blue and green mountains. The graphics had the same shredded look to it. There was also a recolor of the clouds and the moon from the toxic waste dump. The music, if you can call it that, was merely a deep rumbling noise. One of the first things I encountered was a multicolored creature with big heads emerging from a small cave in the ground. They all made a synchronized shaking sound, and they walked into a group one after another emerging from the cave, ignoring me. Having no other way to go, I followed them on their route. More and more emerged from the cave, until the group had to have been at least 100 creatures. Eventually the pathway ended in a cliff. I was shocked to see that upon reaching the cliff, all the creatures had begun to jump off into the abyss. I've seen enemies walk off cliffs before, but I've never seen NPCs commit mass suicide like this. Very unsettling way to start off the level. I continued on, flying over various strange animals like the ones shown here. Another group of the multicolored bobbleheads were just jumping up and down, only to get snatched up by one of the large birds. I'm very certain this is a sprite version of the giant condor from Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. I defeated some of the condors in battle, but it bothered me that these bobbleheads seemed to be eager to die. If the game itself is alive, then perhaps the creatures in these levels were also alive. And some just have very unhappy lives, if this behavior is any indication. What provokes them to do this? In the back of my mind, I am almost suspect of the glowing moon in the sky. At the end of the level, I saw yet another group of bobbleheads marching towards a large monster and being devoured. This was starting to disgust me. So acting on impulse, I fired an I-beam at both the monster and the bobbleheads, destroying the cave. The monster became angry and ran through the remaining bobbleheads to fight me. Although it lacked any range attacks, it was relentless, but it was no match for me. I was in the home stretch now, up to the bosses. My plan was to go through Batra first, then Megalon. After that, I would watch the last TV screen, play the Black Labyrinth level before fighting Mecha-Godzilla, and lastly going through the chase level with the Hell Beast. I was curious to see if it would have another new form, but first, it's time to beat up Batra. As expected, he started off in his larva form. The music was Varen's battle theme. The fight started off simple. Larva Batra fought in a similar fashion as Magma did, charging back and forth, and occasionally firing off lightning from its horn. During the fight, I noticed that Mothra's combat skills were altered in my favor. I-beams did 2 times as much damage as they did originally. Now they were just as strong as Godzilla's punches. The poison powder was similarly improved. It also did this nice thing where it would actually hit the enemies that it was used on. In the original game, even though Mothra could fly, she was never able to fly over an opponent. You would just get knocked back the same way as if it ran straight into them, which was extremely annoying. But not anymore. I can now change directions and fly around, which is a big help. Fighting Imago Batra was like fighting a clone of Mothra. Although Batra is distinctly faster and stronger. No longer impeded by his slow-moving larva form, Imago Batra was a fearsome opponent. Although it lacked a lightning horn, it now had a more powerful I-beam. Batra could change direction just like I could, since the battle involved a lot more flipping and flying around. It was pretty damn fun, to be honest. So after defeating Batra, I was excited to see what Megalon had in store for me. But first I went through an Indigo Cliffs level and shot through a bunch of those creatures for health power-ups. His music was Gigan's theme, which makes sense, since Gigan was his battle partner in Megalon's first and only debut film appearance. He was a lot like Mogira, but a lot faster and with a lot more weapons. He'd start out charging with his drills. I like to simply fly back and forth around him, which seemed to really annoy him. After a few seconds, he'd stop, turn around, and start spitting out grenades. Those were a pain because they bounce before they hit the ground. Lastly, he started spamming a lightning beam. It only went straight forward, so it was easy to duck under and shoot him with my I-beams. Overall, I'd describe him as strong, persistent, but dumb. It was now near the end of Entropy, so I started up the last TV screen to see what I'd get this time. The result was rather unpleasant. The music for this grotesque scene was Password theme. I couldn't figure out why this animation was so sinister and violent compared to the other two. The whole game seemed to be growing more malevolent. As I went on to finish Entropy, I began to feel drained. It's hard to describe, like I'd suddenly become tired when before I wasn't. Most likely just because of the tension from all that's happened in the game getting to me, but who knows. The last level type of Entropy is what I like to call the Shadow Labyrinth. The scenery was recolored from gold to black. The music was an evil ambience similar to Unforgiving Cold, but distinctly different. It was my first sign that this level was going to be distressing. I traveled through the maze for about a minute, and I noticed that there weren't creatures hovering around. It was an odd transition from the Gold Labyrinth, which was overrun with creatures, to this level that had nothing at all. But then again, this might be a good thing. Then the screen went dark. I immediately snapped out of my daze from a few seconds ago. Everything had been darkened so that the only thing I could see was the Mothra sprite. I couldn't tell where I was going and ended up frantically running into walls. I heard a noise, the sound of a crowd running through a hallway. Along with the running came the roars, loud roaring noises, which I would describe as something like a rabid dog the size of an elephant, screaming in fury. I could tell whatever was making the noise, there were a lot of them. I knew there was something there, but it wasn't until I did some screen cap editing and got to see what my pursuers looked like. At the time, I couldn't see where I was going or what they looked like. I was literally running blind. The mob of beasts eventually caught up with me. All I could think was no, as I saw my life bar rapidly declining. The monsters had taken down half of my total health. I was only saved when the light came back on, and the attackers disappeared. And so the challenge of this level was revealed. Find the exit before the lights go out again, and a pack of monsters maul you to death. I was in panic mode now, moving as fast as I could go while trying every path I could find for a way out. As I played through the level, the lights went out a total of 3 times. The second time I would have been dead meat if it had not been for one of the wide-eyed statues. As I stayed close to it, the monsters seemed to all avoid me until the light came back on. The statue seemed to ward them away somehow. I was safe as long as I stayed near the statue, but at the same time I had to leave to find the exit. The Shadow Labyrinth turned out to be a lot smaller than the Gold Labyrinth, as it took me about 6 minutes to navigate to the end. Only one more boss monster, Mecha-Godzilla. I started the fight and got something unexpected. Not only did my life shoot back to 100 again, it seems to do that randomly, but instead of a replacement boss, I was fighting Godzilla. But Betty Godzilla Van Werther Salt could figure this out. Mecha-Godzilla started off like fighting a Godzilla clone, but his disguise burned away after only 3 life bars. Usually a transformation only occurred during the halfway point. At this point it was like fighting Mecha-Godzilla in the normal game, which felt kinda nice for once. Although it wasn't exactly like normal. He also had a rainbow beam and finger missiles. This prevented me from doing the old trick of backing him into a corner and hitting him with the I-beams in a spot where he can't hit me. After getting him down to half his health, something weird started to happen. His sprite started to glitch in much the same way as Gozora's had way back in the first world. After a few seconds, the glitches began to take a new shape, and thus the game had created not Mecha-Godzilla. The human face on this one gave it a very, very uncanny look. It was one of the stronger replacement monsters and had the most firepower. Pictured here is its mouth beam, which I got caught in the middle of. Even though it was a bit stronger, it was a lot slower than its original counterpart and couldn't jump around as much. I won the fight by consistently staying out of the line of fire and bombarding the machine with the poison powder as I flew over it. One last thing to do. The Hellbeast chase. The Entropy end chase ended up being exactly what I was afraid it would be, a labyrinth level. All the other chases, although difficult, were extremely straightforward. You just had to run to the right and not get touched. But this took all the simplicity out of it. There was no telling how big this labyrinth would be, or where the exit was. And now not only did I have to constantly backtrack and find my way out, I had to also avoid getting one-hit killed by the red monster. For the first 3 seconds, it didn't show up, but I knew it would eventually. So I started picking up the pace when I heard a loud flapping sound. And there it was, in a flying form. It flew with bat-like wings and was fast and relentless as ever. For reasons already stated, this was probably the most nerve-wracking of all the end chases. As such, I kept all my focus on the game and not taking any screen caps. However, I did take one of the monster doing something I found very interesting. I managed to lose it by going through a path that it apparently didn't expect, and it was blocked from attacking me by one of the organic walls of the red labyrinth, or at least I thought. I tried clawing through the wall for a second before opening up its mouth and tearing the wall apart with its intestinal jaw, but those brief milliseconds that the monster was held back might have been the key to me finding the exit. The path to the exit was long and complex, but from what I remember, I went up, then started flying back towards the left. I'm still not sure why I chose the particular way. Just a lucky hunch, I suppose. I was sweating profusely, but my luck had saved me yet again. I had hoped I wouldn't run out before I finished the game. There were only 2 more worlds to go. The next was the penultimate world, Extus. In the brief transition between Entropy and Extus, I was hoping that I would get Godzilla and Anguirus back. As the board appeared, I saw that my wishes were half granted. I got Godzilla back, but no Anguirus. I would have preferred both, but despite Anguirus' neat abilities, I would have chosen Godzilla if I had to pick between the two. Extus had two different colored temples, white and pink, a pyramid, what looked like some modern buildings, and two other icons I couldn't figure out at the time. The new boss monsters were Kamunga, Gorosaurus, and not Ghidorah, whom I was dreading to see, let alone fight. With Godzilla back, I was eager to explore, yet still cautious. I went to the clues level first. This time, Face's questions were a lot more random than ever. Do elephants breathe? Yes. Weird face number 2. Have you ever been by a family member? No. Weird face number 6. Have you ever... anyone? No. Weird face number 8. Is green your favorite color? No. Weird face number 10. Is the computer the pinnacle of modern technology? Yes. Weird face number 4. Are you a tough guy? Yes. Weird face number 12. Can you fly? No. Weird face number 9. Can you stand on your head? Yes. Weird face number 7. Do you hate raccoons? No. Reaction confused. Do you feel blame? No. Weird face number 11. Would you like a new monster? Yes. Reaction surprise. Will you miss me? Yes. Reaction sad. I was happy that I was getting a new monster, but that last question really bothered me. Will you miss me? Is Face referring to when I finish the game? I thought. Since the revelation of the game's truly otherworldly nature, I wasn't sure what to think of Face or anything in this game. But something about that last statement gave me a genuine feeling of sadness for Face. As I was thinking about this, the game had gone back to the board, and I had a new monster. But I had no idea who it was supposed to be. The sprite had a slight resemblance to Rodan, but the head was totally off. I moved this mysterious newcomer to a white temple icon. When I started the level, the screen appeared with the text, "Find the gem," presumably instructions on beating the level. After that, I got my first look at my new playable monster. A dark, blue, hairy creature with bat wings and a skull-like face named Solomon. I also found that my path was blocked by a beam of light and a small pillar with a plate on it. I figured that the beam of light was blocking the exit, so I had to find the gem and put it on the plate to deactivate the beam. How exactly I was going to do that, I didn't know. There wasn't anything in the original game requiring you to find an item to beat the level. I'd have to find the way out when I obtained the gem. The only direction I had to go was left, so I proceeded onward. Solomon was an interesting monster, to say the least. He was capable of both fighting and of heat beam, both of which proved very useful. He also had a kick and a slash with his wings, but he couldn't duck. The White Temple was a vocalizing choir, or a video game approximation of such. It's hard to describe, but it sounded very holy. It wasn't long until I started running into waves of strange and new enemies. They did little to stop me, and I ran past them while slashing and didn't take any damage. There was a pause between each wave. After you killed about 10, there wouldn't be any for about a minute, and then the next wave would appear. After about 5 minutes, I noticed holes in the ceiling and floor. Guillotine-mouthed creatures would rapidly fly up and down these crevices, so I had to take my jumps carefully because I didn't know if I'd get another shot at this. Luckily, I managed to make it through without a scratch. I'm just lucky, I guess. After that, I found myself at the end of a hallway facing some sort of mini-boss monster. It moved fast and had a kind of projectile that was shot in 4 directions, but I killed it quite easily using Solomon's heat beam. When the battle was over, I had my gem, which was inside the creature's head. I found that I could pick up and hold the gem by walking over it and holding down B. I made the long trek back, deposited the gem on the plate, which deactivated the beam like I thought. I left the stage and was shown probably the strangest quirk relating to Solomon. Every time I completed a stage or defeated a boss with Solomon, the screen would appear. I have no idea what Still the Best 1973 means, but the date nor the phrase means anything to me. I spent a lot of time thinking about it. The next level I played was one I like to call the Bronze Pyramids. I used Godzilla and found out he had leveled up to 12 since I last played him in Dementia. The Bronze Pyramids were fairly normal as far as levels go, but the visuals were quite interesting. Almost unusually colorful and lively. The music had a fittingly Egyptian style to it. It was slow and mysterious sounding. I strolled through the levels fighting off various enemies. None were too difficult, although the ants could be a pain if you ran into too many of them at once. My favorite enemy was the giant reptile I encountered halfway through. At the end of the level I came across a giant pyramid and engaged in another mini boss fight. Although this one was a bit different because I had to fight two monsters at the same time. Individually I could have dealt with them easily, but fighting both of them at once was challenging. I sped things up by tricking one of the twin beasts into barbecuing its brother by jumping when he uses flame breath. After defeating the twin monster, I noticed something strange after returning to the board. I was now able to move my monster piece anywhere on the board without limits. Normally Godzilla could only move up to 3 spaces each turn, and Mothra could move up to 5. I wanted to try out Solomon some more, so I moved his piece to one of the brown pillar icons. When I got to the level, I realized what the level icon was representing. Totem poles. I was greeted by 2 of them right at the beginning. The music had a Native American sound to it. It seemed to be using the same instruments as the Entropy forest did. It was just as foreboding. I walked around for 3 minutes with nothing else in sight besides the totem poles. I didn't realize it until then, but I wasn't expecting another level where nothing alive was in it. After all the activity and Entropy at least. Walking by these multicolored faces, this unnerving level left me feeling like I was being watched. After about only 10 minutes of starting Extus, I was already halfway through it. After getting back from the totem pole level, I tried out one of the TV screens just to see how strange they were, and I got this. Even more strange than before, apparently. The music for this was Uranus's theme. I switched back to Godzilla to play another level, and this time it was quite a surprise. It was a normal-looking city level. The colors were gloomy, but still, this was a shock. This was a kind of level I would expect in a Godzilla game, and I was kind of mad that we didn't get to play it earlier. The music was the Earth theme. I found it strange that a level fitting a Godzilla game would show up this late, but there's no point in crying over spilled milk, I supposed. I moved Solomon over to the grayish icon, which turned out to be a giant high-tech laboratory of some sort. Loads of mechanical drones in this level, but Solomon cleared through them just like the White Temple enemies. There was a strange flying cyborg enemy, which was annoying because it would always fly away whenever you jumped to attack it. Also of interest were these large stasis tanks that would hold some kind of monster in it. As you would guess, sometimes the monsters would awaken and shatter through the glass. I tried to get past the stasis tanks as fast as I could, because the monsters inside proved to be quite vicious little bastards upon release. At the end of the level, there was an elevator which I used to go down to the bottom level, where the exit was. Along the way, I was getting shot at by security drones. I couldn't leave the elevator, so my only defense was the heat beam. The last level type was a simple thing I called the Heart Temple for obvious reasons. Nothing but a large hallway filled with floating enemies shaped like human hearts. They were incapable of causing you damage, so all you had to do was run through the level and smash as many of them as you could to get all power-ups. One run through these levels would get your life meter back up to full, and I would greatly appreciate these levels later. The Heart Temple's music reminded me of a circus tune. It had an overly cheerful theme to it, which gave the level a really weird feeling. Having seen all the level types, I chose to fight Gorosaurus with using Solomon. The music for this fight was Gazora's theme. It was during the fight that I realized that Solomon is really overpowered. A single well-aimed slash could take down as many as 4 of the enemy's life bars. Due to this, the fight was over quickly, and since Gorosaurus had no projectile attack or anything that could match Solomon's deadly claws, but I kept the fight going just long enough to see if Gorosaurus would use his iconic kangaroo kick, and I was greatly pleased when he did. Even though I knew Solomon was my fighting ace, I used Godzilla to battle Kumonga, just for variety's sake. I briefly considered using Mothra, but of course Godzilla won out. Kumonga was a very simple opponent, no heat beam or anything. He attacked by jumping on you and stabbing you with his mandibles. He also uses his signature webbing stream to paralyze you. Once you get webbed, Kumonga will sometimes take the opportunity to attack, but mostly it's a way to buy some time, like Gazora backing you into the corner. His music was Hidora's theme. With Gorosaurus and Kumonga defeated, I was at the end of Extus already. But before I fought not Ghidorah, there was something I had to do. I wasn't expecting much from it, but for documentation's sake, I took a look at the other TV screen. This is what it was. I don't think there was much reason behind the TV screens. If I were to guess, I'd say it's some sort of random uncontrollable manifestation of the cartridge's abilities. Or maybe it all makes perfect sense in the game. Who knows? Anyway, Mr. Fawcett's theme was the Saturn music. It was time for the opponent I was dreading, not Ghidorah. Although I had gained some courage with Solomon's combat abilities, I was still nervous. And when I started the fight, I was extremely confused. My opponent was not Ghidorah. I defeated the imposter with a few strikes, then not Mogira showed up. Then it started to make sense. In order to face not Ghidorah, I had to fight all the previous replacement monsters first. So battle them I did. I tore my way through them until I finally made it to not Ghidorah, who was a door rat. Once I stopped laughing, I destroyed him with only 2 slashes. But then the music stopped, and I thought I was going back to the board, but the battle wasn't over yet. The real fight was against the Chimera, a monstrous hybrid of all the replacement monsters. This was by far the most difficult boss yet. Every attack of his would cut through your life bar like butter, while attacks against him were greatly weakened. Solomon's slashes, for example, were now lucky to take at least half of a life bar. During this battle, I gained a great appreciation for 2 things: the battle time limit and the Heart Temple. Had it not been for those things, I would have never beaten this boss. To take down this behemoth, I came up with a strategy. I would switch between Godzilla and Solomon. As one began to get dangerously low on health, I would take him through the Heart Temple while fighting the Chimera with another. I should count my blessings that the Chimera couldn't regain lost health. A very interesting thing about Chimera was that the colored section of his life bar corresponded to his different body parts, so each body part effectively had its own life meter. The head was invincible as long as the other parts were present. In addition to being difficult, it was also the longest fight so far. I tried to remember how many times I've gotten taken out of the fight because of the timer, and I lost count around 13. Eventually I destroyed all the components but the head, which now flew around at incredible speed. Chimera fought well, but I was extremely determined, and once he was reduced to a head, he no longer had the power to defeat Solomon, and I heat beamed him into oblivion. I was exhausted after that fight, and worried that it might affect my performance in the end chase level. The headquarters icon was replaced with not the Hellbeast face, but instead a crucifix. I was completely stunned. I wasn't exactly excited about seeing the Hellbeast icon again, but if there was one good thing about those levels, it was that they were predictable. I had a basic idea of what to expect. But now, here I was at the end with a completely different icon. What did it mean? And why a crucifix? It made me very uneasy. I attempted to start the level with Solomon, but I couldn't. I got the notice that simply stated, Solomon can't enter here. It didn't say why, but I think it might have something to do with Solomon's demonic appearance. Since Solomon was out of the question, I went with Godzilla instead. Once I started the level, the crucifix made sense. It was a graveyard. I was still on edge thinking that it was some kind of trick. The last level had always involved running away from the demonic beast, and I wasn't going to get fooled into thinking there would be anything different. So I started running. But after a minute without interruption, I slowed down. It was during this that the music had caught my attention. I knew it sounded familiar when I first heard it, but it took me a while to realize it was an 8-bit rendition of Prayer for Peace from the first Godzilla film. A very sad yet powerful song, even in this form. At about 2 minutes in, I encountered something that I wasn't sure how to react to. My first instinct was to run, but this blue statue-esque being simply floated in place. I felt compelled just to stare at it for a time. Since this was a graveyard and it was floating above a chapel, I guessed it had to have been some kind of angel watching over the deceased. It gave me a strange but warm feeling. I wouldn't say happy, but I felt like I was at peace. I had never seen anything like this before, yet it seemed very familiar to me. Just as I was about to leave, the Hellbeast appeared, and its presence warped the music into a terrifying distorted screeching sound and transformed the level, desecrating tombstones as a new ground appeared, comprised of blood-soaked bodies. I could feel my heart now beating out of control. I had no chance to escape with the monster that close. It lunged for the kill, but the angel got in its way. The demon roared and started clawing through the angel's legs, and tears of blood streamed through its eyes. I wanted to save the angel, but there was nothing I could do. I had to honor its sacrifice and run. And so, I ran through the hellish landscape as fast as I could. The beast caught up soon after, still swallowing the body of the angel, whose legs had been torn off. The sight of it made my terror change to anger. I now found myself hating this horrible monster. There was no doubt in my mind that it was pure evil, and I wanted it to die. When I got to the end, I remembered how it responded to my insult in Trance. I spoke to it and said, "You're going to pay for this." This was its response. I had no idea how I would follow up with that threat, but nothing could have prepared me for the horrors of the final world. Zenith. Here we are, at the final world. I don't like to discuss this part, and it still bothers me very much, but it's something I have to do, so that I can put this all behind me. People deserve to know. At this point, I was very aware of the game's unnatural nature, but Zenith was different than the other worlds. While the others might have been strange, sometimes frightening, the world of Zenith was a nightmare. I didn't have to go any further than the board screen for an indication that something was wrong with Zenith. The first thing I noticed was the blood-red texture of the board, and the music, which was an eerie whistling tune. I noticed that I had Solomon and Anguirus back, and I felt better for a second. But then I scrolled to the right and saw who my enemies were this time. It was Setsuroya and Ghidorah, but judging from the icon, it was a different Ghidorah than the original, standing on the ground instead of flying. The grotesquely detailed pinkish-red icon also caught my eye. I couldn't tell what it was supposed to be, and I was afraid to find out. Going back to my side of the board, I decided there wasn't much of a choice but to do my usual routine. I was not ready for what happened. I almost jumped out of my chair when this happened. accompanied by a terribly distorted version of the password theme. It looked like Face had fallen victim to a terrible glitch. Is this what he meant by, "Will you miss me?" Did he know this would happen? My thoughts were stopped short as soon as the screen started glitching and seemingly falling apart. So I ran it out quickly. When I got back to the board, I had somehow gained a new monster. I hadn't even been asked if I wanted one. I tried to select it and this happened. What the hell is going on? The game's behavior was scaring me, and I hadn't even started the levels yet. I couldn't understand why the game would randomly give me a character, and then deny me use of it. For the time being, there was little that could be done, and I viewed the last TV screen. No animation. No music. Every instinct I had was telling me to stop playing, to just turn the game off, and something in the game itself might have been trying to tell me, or warn me just how horrible the last world was. Every stretch of the way I was compelled to give up, but I couldn't now, on the last world. Besides, after taunting me with the memories of Melissa, I felt the game owed me some answers. I noticed that the first level was a red temple, so I thought it would be familiar with the level graphics, if nothing else. I went in with Godzilla. Godzilla had been shrunk, the level and score meters had vanished, and the blue temple statue faces were back. The music was similar to the blue temple also. Strange, haunting vocalizations. I tried to get my spirits up by thinking, well, if this is anything like the blue level, then that might mean there's no enemies to deal with. How wrong I was. After a short walk, all the statue's eyes started glowing, and a pack of the beasts from the Shadow Labyrinth came running towards me. Since they were coming from the right side of the screen, I had to fight my way through them. This battle greatly tested my reflexes, but thanks to my speed, I plowed through the beasts. They gave off health power-ups after dying, which helped with recovering the damage that they did me. However, as I continued through the hallway, the statue's eyes glowed again, summoning another wave. It seemed to be the same number of them, but I was less prepared this time, and took more damage. I had gone through 4 waves until I reached the end of the hall, where I heat-beamed the last of the monsters over the edge into the abyss. At first it seemed I had reached a dead end, but after the statue's eyes stopped glowing, a brick path appeared before me. I followed the path, which kept me moving to the right until it stopped at a wall, where I was to go vertically by jumping up to the ledges. Along the way I encountered new creatures and some sort of strange shrine, which had a statue of the Hell Beast and some other creature I didn't recognize. As I went through, the path took a downward direction. I had to carefully aim my jumps and avoid the enemies, which were plentiful in this part of the stage. They didn't have many attacks, but they could easily shove you off the ledge of the platform. At the end of the tunnel, there was a few smaller platforms floating above nothingness. I landed on one towards the left of the screen, and then something came down from above. It looked like the blue angel from the graveyard, except now it was red and had a skull face. And the pleasant feelings I had for the blue angel were not present with this red one. And as it hovered around, the eye sockets started glowing like the statues, summoning monsters to attack me. Surely this was not the same malevolent creature I encountered before. This must have been some kind of imposter. The battle was nerve-wracking, as I started with nearly half of my health and I had to deal with multiple opponents, as well as the threat of gravity, to make things even worse. As the red angel took damage, some of the panels fell off, until only 3 remained. But my luck had not run out yet. Just as I thought it was over, I struck the red angel one more time and turned out to be the last hit that I needed to take. Just as the red angel completely disintegrated, the game instantly went back to Zenith. I moved Mothra over to the nearest stage of the red temple, which seemed like a garbled mess of letters spelling kill, and began playing. As I suspected, all the level graphics were made out of jumbled letters, and Mothra, just like Godzilla, had been shrunk half size. I began to suspect that all Zenith's levels would be like this. The background music was terrible, like if someone put all the sounds that NES was capable of making into a blender and started piecing them back together into a song. I had to turn the volume down because of it. Playing as Mothra helped me avoid enemies a lot easier, but they were nonetheless determined to get me. The first minutes I saw were headless Gigans. and later on hybrid monsters pieced together from the previous bosses, like the Biolante-headed things seen above. 5 minutes had gone by as I had seen nothing new. Then the level shifted into another segment. The music changed from a loud annoying beeps to something far more ambient and menacing. The level graphics had also changed, now looking like a blood-drenched junkyard. The way everything in this level was sickening to look at. The enemies multiplied in number, never ceasing to follow after me, and became harder and harder to avoid. At the end of the level, the situation had reached its climax, as a swarm of monsters fused together into one enormous, terrifying hybrid. Once I had gotten through the initial shock, I discovered that there was a way to destroy it, constantly shooting I-beams into the Hedora cluster that formed its heads. If you attacked anywhere else, it would regenerate the damage. Even with that knowledge, it was an extremely difficult fight. I'd say it was as hard as fighting the Moon Beast, if not harder. The most common attack was lunging forward in its arms, covered in Gigan saws and blades. If they touched you, it would instantly drain your health. When it was over, the remaining monsters collapsed into a heap. Then they, after the ground below, started to disintegrate and sink towards the bottom of the cave. When I first came back to the board, I thought to myself, so far the game has put the easiest levels first. If that's the case, how bad was the rest of Zenith? With 2 levels down and 3 to go, my monsters had all taken a foothold in the world of the nightmare of Zenith. Deciding what action to take next was the most tense and difficult thing in my life. But ultimately, I had no way of knowing what the next level would be, or how well my monsters were prepared for them. So my option was to guess. I tried to interpret what the icons of the levels ahead of me were. The last level before the boss monster seemed to be some kind of volcanic area with lava and open flames. The middle icon I still didn't get, except that it looked fleshy and vaguely like an organ. The one nearest to me and the one I was about to enter looked like thorny veins covered in a puddle of blood. I guess this would be the level with blood rivers, like the chase levels in Dementia. As such, I went with Anguirus due to his rolling ability. The level, which I called Blood Lake, looked like I expected. Rivers of blood accompanied by thorny-covered vines, which were then scattered along the sides of the ground. The music was rather faint, but I could hear a distant drum beat and a few other instruments. A lot of echoes, and something sounding like they were hitting a drum underwater. As I expected, Anguirus shrunk just as Godzilla and Mothra did. I felt less secure with my giant monsters no longer being so giant. I walked along without interruption for a minute until my path had reached a dead end. There was a massive gap between the ground I was walking on and the ground to the right of the screen. I would have swam across it, continuing on to the right, but due to the huge mass of branches in the way, there was nowhere to go. 2 creatures with gliding membranes in their arms, and lamprey-like mouths, were perched on the outstretched vines and screeching at me, much like a crow does when an invader gets in its territory. Another unnerving display of possible sentience by the creatures of this game, if it's even accurate to refer this as a game anymore. I descended into the blood, sinking slowly to the floor. Aquatic enemies were everywhere, and they were very hard to avoid. The black shark in particular was very aggressive and hard to deal with, but thankfully I only encountered one. As the scene becomes more and more crowded, I swam up to the surface to find that it would be littered with floating corpses. Creepy set piece, but no threat, I thought. They were trying to pull me under, and they were draining my health as they did. They attacked as a group, and when I got one off me, another would jump on behind it. I had to curl up in a ball and roll until to loosen their grip, and then when I did, I quickly retreated. It wasn't long before I reached another land path. I was interrupted by this screen. The screen was only up for about 30 seconds, then it went back to the level. I was facing another dead end, and a pregnant humanoid creature was hanging from the top right of the screen by a spine or umbilical cord. Instantly, the creature's belly was split open from the inside, and the lower part of the body was ripped apart and fell into the river below. The Blood Lake's boss has been revealed. It came flying towards me, making a shrill hacking sound. I was forced to move back. The bat was highly mobile, fast, and very difficult to hit. As I moved back along the ground, the monster opened up its mouth and shot a barrage of needles. I jumped over them and managed to give it a blow on the head, and it started flying out of my reach. As the bat was flying, it shot a stream of fire out of its eye sockets and started trying to hit me with the flames as I rolled across the ground, draining much of my power. This cycle repeated about 3 times until the monster was defeated. With most of my health drained, I went back to the edge of the level, and the large bramble vine blocking the exit was now gone. Now only 2 more levels to go. Godzilla, Mothra, and Anguirus had all completed 1 level, leaving Solomon, and also the mysterious 5th monster. I tried to get to access it, but with no luck. I chose to use Godzilla again for the next level, and Solomon for the final one. The penultimate level was what I refer to as the organic level, which was the most visually unpleasant out of all of them. Right from the start I could see that the graphics were freakishly different. The atmosphere was gruesome and foreboding, with the addition of loud, drowning noises. I was dreading what I would see at these levels, and only a few minutes had happened before something appeared. 2 hideous things. It's hard to describe most of the level. Everything was so disturbing and being semi-realistic look to it. Most of the enemies looked halfway between real animals and misshapen lungs of gore and real teeth. It was also worth noting that all of them were considerably larger than Godzilla, and although the majority of them were not very intelligent, each of them took around 30 hits to kill. Due to this, it was a better idea to run away from them than fight, but it was never clear what exactly direction to run in. While most of the levels involved going to the right to the exit, the path of this level was primarily going down, by walking to the edge of the platform and jumping to a lower one. There was no way to make sure that you were going the right way, nor any apparent means of going back up to the higher platforms if necessary. Also, certain enemies acted as if they were aware you had to jump down, and would stand there on the lower edge of the platform, waiting for you. When this happened, I had to walk back until the monster would leave. As I went on, I came across a platform stacked above each other, with little space in between, making it look like a maze. This meant I couldn't jump, and made escape from the enemies difficult. Thankfully, the only enemies I had to fight in these mazes were 4-legged beasts seen at the beginning of the level. Adding to the difficulty were long tapeworm-esque monsters that would rise themselves up between 2 platforms and trap you in. This was costing even more power, and I couldn't afford to do it without the health beam for very long. While trying to avoid the abominations that dwell in this level, I found out that you can stand idle for one place too long. The ground tries to absorb your monster. I think it was about 4 minutes before the end of the level made me physically sick. The tension was getting to me, and having to take in all these disgusting sights made me want to puke. I nearly did pause the game and look for a bag, but I was able to hold it together. Finally, it was time for another boss fight. It was certainly ugly, but not quite as horrific as I feared it would be. But more important than dealing with its appearance was defeating it. And since I had less than half my life bar to start with, there was no room for errors. It was attached from the floor when I first saw it, but after 10 hits it detached from the floor and began floating. It was fast, and unlike the Blood Lake monsters, he wasn't impeded by any sort of gravity. It was able to fly through the ground without any collision effect. It used this to its advantage. It would float beneath the ground and spring up randomly just to bite you. It stopped doing this, however, after a few well-placed kicks to its face. The pink area on its upper jaw was the weak point. Too many hits there would cause it to spasm uncontrollably. The new strategy was to rapidly float up and down while moving back and forth across the stage, trying to consistently keep its jaws aimed towards me. Health was going to be critical at this point, and I spammed the heat beam from which it had no defense. It was the last stretch of the battle, and the monster had lost its mind, rapidly rushing back and forth and gnashing at its jaws. I had to duck under it, then strike it when its back was turned to me. 20 more hits and it was destroyed. 1 more level to go. I didn't hesitate. I selected Solomon and entered. Perhaps a little too fast. This last level was definitely the peak of the disconnect between what the NES was graphically capable of and what the game could create. The music also caught my attention. It was one of the only songs that appeared more than once. A horrible screeching from when the Hell Beast appeared in the graveyard. As soon as I started, there was an enemy prepared to attack, a centaur wielding a whip, and it wasn't alone. When I started fighting, several more centaurs appeared, coming from both sides of the screen at the same time. It was too much to handle. Solomon's flight saved me from taking too much damage at the start of the level. The centaurs followed after, but seemingly they were unable to jump. After escaping the centaurs, I noticed gaps in the ground. While trying to avoid the jumping sword-mouthed enemies in the middle of the fight, I got close to the surface of lava and a creature emerged trying to grab me. It didn't succeed, but I was startled. Careful maneuvering would be needed to avoid instant death. As new enemies appeared, the level soon became very difficult. A lot of trouble came from the stocky red enemies that stood on top of a tall, narrow mountain and spewed fire. I got by them by waiting till their backs were turned and hit them with a flying kick, which made them fall into the lava. It was around this time that I noticed that I wasn't gaining health from killing enemies. Not all the ground was stable. At one point, the ground was reduced to small chunks and slowly drifted to the right. Some of them would sink into the lava upon landing on them, and there was no way to tell which ones would sink and which ones wouldn't. Being so close to the lava added the threat of the lava creatures, so this was frustrating. I was feeling very hot, which made me concentrate harder. If you ever had a heat rash, it felt similar to that. I would periodically stop for water because of it. I thought this was most certainly due to the game and not my imagination, but I kept pushing that thought out of my head. I didn't want to think about it. At the end of the stage, I encountered a boss rising from the lava. Its arrival noted an ungodly howling roar. When I walked on land, I saw how gigantic it was, several times the size of Solomon. I went to fly up and attack, and it opened its mouth and let out a huge burst of fire. I can fly to dodge the flames and then get close enough to the boss to fire a heat beam to its face, causing it to stumble backwards. If it didn't stumble backwards, it would have kept moving to the left until it forced Solomon into the lava, as there was no more ground within reach. The beast had to wait between uses of its fire breath, and it seemed to cost a great deal of energy. I used this time to attack it, but the fire wasn't the only weapon, and I had to worry about monsters swatting me away with its clawed hands. The battle felt like a tug-of-war between the two monsters over the bridge of land. After about 40 hits, it was defeated, tumbling downwards into the lava where it came from, and then the final stage had been completed. At last, it was down to the two bosses in the final encounter with the Hell Beast. For some reason, I thought Ghidorah would be easier to fight, so I confronted him first. The classic Ghidorah battle music from the original game had started up as I was faced with the new King Ghidorah. King Ghidorah was as powerful and unrelenting as ever. He instantly lashed out with a gravity beam, which were more damaging than Godzilla's heat beam. It had become a struggle of constantly beating up Ghidorah at every opportunity, that way he could keep him from attacking. But Ghidorah soon saw through my tactic and started using physical attacks as well. He would strike with each one of his necks, knocking me backwards and making it impossible to get close enough to punch him. I had an idea, to wait for him to lunge with one of his heads and immediately blast it with the heat beam. It worked, and to my surprise, the heat beam actually obliterated Ghidorah's middle head. It was only a few seconds before I realized what this would lead to, and sure enough, King Ghidorah was using the power of the glitch to transform himself into Mecha-King Ghidorah. What really shocked me though was the sudden change of music. I had heard it before, but it wasn't from the original NES game. It was from the game Super Godzilla during the Mecha-King Ghidorah fight. Mecha-King Ghidorah's first attack was its most deadly, the Machine Hand. Very similar to Gigan's Saw, it would immobilize the monster and rapidly drain down the health bar. Fortunately, before Ghidorah could do a lot of damage, the timer ran out. I would need to defeat Mecha-Godzilla quickly to prevent him from using the Machine Hand, so I sent Solomon in to fight him. The two monsters were evenly matched in strength, but Solomon was faster, and by slashing and heat beaming without pause, the cyborg monster soon met its end. With Ghidorah defeated, I was returned to the board. I now outnumbered the enemy by 4 monsters to 1, and victory seemed to be soon at hand. The base icon had changed to a blood red color. I could feel hatred emanating from it. I started to fight with Destoroyah with Anguirus, and the music was the same as Ghidorah's. When the fight began, Destoroyah was in his microscopic form. After one hit, it changed to the Juvenile, which had a few attacks but was easy to deal with. The fight became more serious when Destoroyah entered the aggregate form, gaining the use of large arms and micro-oxygen beams. Anguirus' roll attack, which had been very useful up to now, was rendered useless by Destoroyah consistently attacking me with his large arms every time I tried to use it. For this part of the fight, I had to rely on my brute strength. Just before the time ran out, Destoroyah had changed to his flying form, which Anguirus was ill-suited to fight. Going back in, I fought the flying form with Mothra. which seemed pretty fitting. Mothra was weaker than Anguirus, but was much better equipped to dodge and counter Flying Dethroya's attacks, so the fight was in my favor. However, the Mecha-King Ghidorah fight music started playing, and Dethroya changed it to its final form soon after, which drastically turned the tables. Mothra's attacks were doing very little to Dethroya, and I had to move furiously to avoid damage while waiting for the timer to run out. Even though it would be near impossible to beat Dethroya with Mothra, I still had 3 other monsters. Final form Dethroya was very resistant to taking damage, and the heavily armored foe would not be defeated without a long fight. In the last part of the fight, it wasn't much strategy, just attack as brutally and as fast as I could. On the last bar of health Dethroya had, he used a counterattack, a beam of energy from his chest. I didn't know how powerful it would be, but just before it could fire, I punched Dethroya in the chest cavity, destroying him, and that was it. The last kaiju boss had been defeated. In the midst of all of the excitement, I had briefly forgotten that there was still one thing I needed to do before the game was over. Seeing the icon again hit me like a ton of bricks. I froze for a few minutes. I had come so far to get to this point, but I was terrified. I really didn't know what to expect in the last encounter. Before I could let myself think about it any longer, I moved Godzilla over to the stage. You're here now. This is the end. Just one thing, and it's all over. And when the screen changed, there was nothing. Just Godzilla and a black screen. When I walked back and forth and fired a heat beam, nothing happened. Till I heard something. The faint sound of a familiar drum beat. Oh dear God. My first thoughts on realizing that I would have to fight Red, the creature that tormented me through the entire game. How would I be able to fight something that could kill me with one hit? Thankfully, Red was no longer able to deliver one-hit kills, but despite that, this was still the most difficult battle I've faced, in this game or otherwise. If I had any real comprehension of what I was going into before I started the fight, I would have never done it. Very soon I learned what a horrible mistake I'd made. Red reached out and clawed at Godzilla, and when the claws hit him, I felt it. I know it's common for people to cringe when they're playing a video game and their character gets hit or loses a life, but it wasn't like that. I felt genuine physical pain. When the pain struck me, I paused the game. I hadn't suffered any actual injury, but it felt like my shoulder had just been clawed through. I had seen and experienced many unpleasant things at this point. The game causing real pain is where I drew the line. Yes, I would be disappointed that I wouldn't see the end of the game, but the risk was no longer worth it. I was about to get up and take one last screenshot before turning the NES off when I realized something. I couldn't get up. I was paralyzed to my seat. The only muscles I could move were my fingers and thumbs. As the terror set in, a new message appeared on the screen. I started to scream, but only a weak choking sound came out. I desperately tried to get my body to move, but it did nothing. I was looking in every direction, and then I looked over at the computer. Somehow the computer was taking screenshots of the game on its own. I still don't know how or why, but something in the game must have been causing it. Since Red could hear what I was saying, I tried begging for him to let me go. From here, things started to get hazy, as I was under extreme stress. But from what I can remember, I said, I'm sorry I insulted you. I didn't mean it. I didn't know things would get this serious. Please just let me go. If you let me go, I promise I'll never tell anybody or turn on the game ever again. Please. And Red replied, will survive. The statement could not have been more clear. If I couldn't kill Red, then he would kill me. Like an idiot, I played around with something that I didn't understand, and now it might cost me my life. I stopped struggling to move and accepted the reality of the situation. There was no other way to get out of this. I had to kill Red. It all went by so fast. If it weren't for the screenshots, I might not have even remembered any of this. Just like in those chase levels, Red moved at a horrifyingly fast pace. There was barely enough time to process a thought, and thus there was no more time to form a strategy. I had to rely solely on my wits and reflexes. To make things even worse, there was no way to predict of what kind of attacks Red might use, so I constantly had to think of offense and defense. I felt like every hit that Godzilla took, it hurt me. They all hurt. I tried so hard to avoid damage, but every attack that I dodged left me vulnerable to another, and the pain just got worse. After he jumped over me, Red's eyes started to glow. I moved as far back as I could and ducked, but there was no dodging this one. When this hit me, I really did scream. I screamed so loud that someone in my apartment should have been able to hear me, but they didn't. Just looking at the image hurts me, making me remember the incinerating burn. I paused the game because it hurt so badly, but Red unpaused the game and attacked me again. I immediately counterattacked with the heat beam, again and again until the power meter was diminished. I wanted Red to hurt like I did. Just before the timer ran out, Red transitioned into his swimming form. I didn't think the timer would still be affecting a battle like this. I'm thankful for it because it gave me a few minutes to collect my thoughts and decide what to do next. I chose to fight Red's next two forms with the monster I encountered with them, so Anguirus was next. It probably wasn't the smartest idea at the time, but it's what I did. I jumped up and heat beamed Red in the face, and he moved off screen where I couldn't reach him. Then a large wave of mines started to fall from above. I felt this was unfair. If you're gonna cheat, then why do you even let me use the controller? And then he came at me, rushing from the top left of the screen. Damn it! Now I wouldn't even be able to see where his next attack was coming from. Red continued to strike down from random angles. I constantly moved to swerve around him. Another 40 seconds went by and Anguirus was nearly gone, but together we had forced Red into his flying form. So it was Mothra's turn next. Deciding to fight Red with Mothra was a terrible idea. Mothra was instantly overwhelmed by Red, and the life meter was devastated in a mere 15 seconds. Once Mothra's life had hit 2 bars, Red did something I didn't see coming. He reached out, grabbed Mothra, and ate her. After Mothra was devoured, I felt an agonizing pain like being crushed to death. Mothra had been killed for my stupidity, and I would share the pain. It was a short transition from the battle to the board, but it felt like an hour. The pain, combined with being unable to move, was driving me insane. I wanted so badly for this to end. I never wanted anything so much in my life. But I still had hope. There was only one monster left that could be brought to full health by engaging Red in battle. Solomon. If any of them had a chance to save my life, it would be him. Solomon apparently had history with Red. That's when the fight started. This dialogue happened. Red took me by surprise again by immediately burning me with his demonic fire for a second time. As much as it hurt, it really worked to my advantage. Since Solomon started with full health, he still had some to spare. But now, Red has used up all of his energy. It cannot use his ultimate weapon any longer. Now he would die. As he drew closer to the end of the life bar, he turned his whole body to face the screen and flew upward, then slamming down in an attempt to crush Solomon. When that failed to work, he tried to devour Solomon like he did Mothra, but he wouldn't be eating my monster this time. I thought I had won, but I was so wrong. Red wasn't sinking to the bottom, and I still couldn't move. Red was still alive. After seeming defeat by Solomon, Red had reconstructed his body into a gigantic final form, transporting us into a blazing inferno in the process. It was reminiscent of our first encounter, except now the scenery, much like the true power of Red, had become very real. The music had erupted into a loud blaring and a furious drum of death. I faced Red against an insane amount of health. My own demise was imminent. Solomon was my strongest monster, but not even he stood a chance. It was like trying to fight a mountain. Within seconds, Solomon was overpowered and dropped to the floor, when Red crushed him to death underneath his foot. The sadistic demon took his time as he snapped Solomon's vertebrae and ribs like dry, brittle twigs. I could tell he enjoyed the pain. This is hopeless. I'm a dead man. I had no choice but to send another monster to his death. We were all going to die. I only hoped they would forgive me. After decreasing Red's health by a minuscule amount, Anguirus was also obliterated. Red unleashed a hail of blazing hot needles into his face until he collapsed. Another moment of unspeakable agony. The nothingness as my ally faded away. I asked Red how he knew my name, and he said, for years she was tortured by something nobody understood. Now I knew what it was. Now I understood why I was mocked about Melissa's death, and how the game knew about it. Because he knew about it. Because he was the one responsible. And all this time he was going to kill me. I was taken back to the board to send Godzilla to his final stand. Barely anything was left of the board, just Godzilla and Red's icon. And the fifth monster. In the midst of everything that happened, I had completely forgotten about it. I tried yet again to select it. I cursed, begged, screamed at it to do something, anything to help me. To no avail. There was only one thing to do. I knew Godzilla didn't stand any more of a chance than the rest did. But maybe now that all the monsters are gone, the fifth monster might finally awaken. I managed to get the creature's icon selected and pressed A as fast as I could. The icon was starting to shake, as if it was trying desperately to move. It was then that Red decided he was done playing fair, and before I could activate the monster, he went for the killing blow, paralyzing me. My hands started to become numb and unfeeling. But even as my vision started to fade away, I had still tried to press the A button. Red surely was breaking one of his rules, but he must have thought that if he could kill me quickly, then it would be too late for any consequences to matter. He would have won. Well, he was wrong. Red's power was being challenged by another force. It prevented him from killing me, and when I regained my vision, I saw a familiar sight.
We don't have much time.
Who are you?
You already know me. I am Melissa.
What? How is that possible? Red told me that he killed you.
It's true. Even after this, he still tortures me. If you can't stop him, he'll do the same to you.
But how will I be able to stop him now?
I can't fight him, but there is one who can. I will release it from his grasp. Don't give up. I love you.
Her words stirred up something inside me. I wasn't going to die like this. I had to fight more for her life than my own. I had to fight to save Melissa and the world she inhabits. With her help, the fifth monster was finally unleashed. It was time for this to end, once and for all. Together, we would take this damned hellspawn out of existence. Acacius was by far the strongest playable monster in the game. He had to be. if we were to have any chance of surviving. His punch involved him turning his hands into blades, which caused tremendous damage, but Red had more than enough life to spare. In the end, this would come down to pure skill. With one final strike, Red was destroyed. His body disintegrated and sank below, accompanied by a soar of triumphant music. Slowly, the paralysis wore off, and I was able to stand up again. We had done it. Melissa's death had been avenged, and I felt overcome with happiness, until I remembered all the death and pain that led up to this point. All the other monsters who had fought and died. I was about to mourn them, but the game had not yet concluded. Tears of joy streamed down my face and I broke out crying. I cried harder than I had in several years, maybe my whole life. All I had been through, all I've discovered. And now the game was coming to an end. But before she and the others left, Melissa had something to tell me.
You saved us, we are forever grateful. We'll be together again someday.
I am Zachary, and at the time of writing this, it has been 3 weeks since the fateful night when I played the NES Godzilla game. Going back to that night, to immediately after I turned off the NES. Once I was able to start walking around again, the first thing I did was unplug the NES, take out the cartridge, and put them in a separate sock drawer. I looked over at my computer. All the screenshots you've seen in the story were saved. I backed up all the images on a flash drive before I turned off the computer, just in case. After that, I hit the bed and instantly passed out. It was not a restful sleep, but one of complete exhaustion. It felt like no time had passed before I woke up again. And what a day that was. The first thought I could recall coming to mind was, what the hell happened last night? I thought about it for a short while, until it occurred to me to contact the person I got the game from to begin with, Billy. So I called him and told him to just come by to my apartment, which he did. After I showed him the screenshots, he gave me a very basic summary of what had happened. At first, he thought I was pulling a joke on him, but he soon realized that was not the case. Once it hit him that this was real, he was speechless. He made it clear that he had absolutely nothing to do with tampering with the game and had no idea about any of this. So then the obvious question was asked to Billy, where did you get the game from? I got the simple answer of another friend of mine that I trade games with. He assured me that this was a trustworthy person and he had never had any issues with the games he got before. So then Billy called him. But when we told the guy the story, he was completely shocked and surprised as anyone. Except he abruptly hung up on us. This clearly was going nowhere. Before Billy left that day, he asked me if I wanted him to take the cartridge and dispose of it. I sharply declined. He asked how I could possibly still want anything to do with that thing. I told him that I needed to think it over. And that was that. Billy and I haven't talked much since. Even though I told him that that wasn't a case, I get the impression that Billy thinks what happened to the game is his fault. After he left that day, I did some thinking. It was very hard for me to do anything else. I couldn't stop thinking about the game. There were so many questions left unanswered. What was Red? Was Melissa really in the game? How did she get there? Why did all this happen with this game? But the one question that kept me up for nights was, Red said he had known me for a long time. How? Ever since then, I couldn't shake this feeling that I was being watched. The game made me ask questions about death and reality in ways that I never wanted to think about. I'm not too sure of anything anymore. Constantly thinking about it soon began to have a negative impact on my life. I just didn't care about anything else at that point. By comparison, all the other day-to-day activities seemed utter pointless. I eventually decided that I had to choose between one of two things: try to play the game again or destroy it. I tried several times to convince myself of the former, but I never got much further than plugging the NES back in. Just touching the cartridge made me remember all the pain that I felt fighting Red. I wondered if perhaps playing the game again might cause something terrible to happen. I didn't know anything about this game or how it worked. It was too risky. I wasn't sure I could stand another round of the game anyway. So then it was time for the other option. Wanting to get some fresh air, I took the game with me and drove to the lake. I planned on throwing it in. I got up to the lake with the cartridge in my hands and I looked down at it, and I thought of Melissa. If what I experienced in the game was indeed genuine, doing what I did may have been the only way I could save her from endless torment. In a way, this warped game might have saved her soul. Damn it. Once that thought came to my head, I knew then that I wouldn't be able to destroy it. So I just sat down on the bench, gazing at the lake for about an hour. Ultimately, I decided on a third option: selling the game on eBay. It may be selfish, but I promise you that it has nothing to do with money. I honestly don't care how much I get paid for this game, believe me. It's selfish because I don't want to take the responsibility of owning the cartridge anymore. I can't dwell on this forever, and the only way I can deal with this is by putting the game out of my life. So this brings me to the main reason why I'm creating a summary of these events. First is to record the details while I can still remember them, and the second is whoever bids on this game knows what they're getting into. I can't guarantee the safety of anyone who plays this game, or that anything will happen at all. But to the new owner of the game, remember this: be careful. And if you feel as if the game is literally messing with your mind, shut the damn thing off.